The November rain fell with that peculiar English persistence that suggests a personal grievance against the landscape when Lord Peter Wimsey drew his Daimler to a halt beneath the swinging sign of the Dragons. Head in at Lidford St. Agnes, he regarded the heraldic creature depicted thereon with the sort of pained expression typically reserved for watching a promising undergraduate massacre Horace in Translation. "I do beg your pardon," he remarked to the landlord, who was engaged in the Sisyphean task of sweeping rainwater from his doorstep, "but your dragon appears to be suffering from a rather severe case of anatomical deficiency. 2 legs, you see. That makes it a wyvern, not a dragon proper. The College of Heralds would have strong words about such liberties with heraldic accuracy." The landlord, a weathered man named Craddock, whose face bore the resigned expression of one who had long ago ceased to be surprised by the eccentricities of the gentry, paused in his sweeping. "Aye, my lord, though I reckon Sir Ambrose up at the Hall would be more particular about such things than most. Was, I should say. Poor gentleman's past caring about dragons now." "How intriguingly past tense," murmured Wimsey, stepping delicately around a puddle that had formed in the inn-yard. "One assumes this transition from present to past occurred recently, and under circumstances of sufficient interest to warrant the presence of—" He paused, noting the constable's bicycle propped against the inn wall, its official character proclaimed by a small bell that tinkled mournfully in the wind. Official scrutiny. "Found dead this morning, my lord, in his long gallery, beneath that great ship's figurehead he was so proud of. Carved dragon's head it was from some old wreck. They say it fell on him, but Constable Briggs, he's not so sure." Wimsey's pale eyes brightened with the particular gleam that indicated his intellectual appetite had been whetted. A dragon's head as murder weapon. How perfectly appropriate, though I do hope the irony wasn't entirely lost on the victim. "Where might one find this Constable Briggs?" "Inside, my lord, warming himself by the fire and looking proper grim about the whole business." The inn's interior possessed that comfortable gloom peculiar to English public houses, all dark oak and cheerful brass, with the sort of fire that seems to have been burning continuously since the Restoration. Constable Briggs, a solid man whose uniform appeared to have been tailored by someone with an optimistic view of his future girth, looked up from his contemplation of a half-empty pint. "Lord Peter Wimsey," he said, rising with the careful dignity of a man conscious of his official responsibilities. "Inspector Parker said you might be along. Queer business, this. Sir Ambrose Vale found dead in his gallery this morning about 10:30. The maid discovered him when she went up with his morning tea." 10:30 seems rather late for morning tea," observed Wimsey, settling himself into a chair with fluid grace. "Was Sir Ambrose in the habit of such leisurely mornings?" "Not as a rule, my lord. But he'd been up late the night before. Had visitors, he did. Some sort of meeting about his collection. Antiquarian society or some such. How fascinatingly social for a recluse," Wimsey murmured. "And this dragon's head that allegedly fell upon him. I assume it was of sufficient weight to accomplish the deed?" Briggs nodded gravely. "Bronze, my lord, and heavy as sin. Must weigh the best part of 2 stone. Thing is, it was mounted secure as houses on the wall above where they found him. Takes more than accident to bring down something fixed that solid." "Indeed. And yet accidents do happen, particularly when assisted by human agency." Wimsey extracted his cigarette case with the precision of a surgeon selecting an instrument. "I don't suppose anyone thought to examine the mounting brackets for signs of tampering." "That's just it, my lord. Inspector Parker's up there now, and he says the brackets are sound as ever. No tool marks, no signs of forcing. It's almost as if the thing just came loose on its own." "How wonderfully supernatural," Wimsey observed dryly, lighting his cigarette. "Though I've always found that when objects begin behaving in defiance of the laws of physics, there's usually a perfectly rational explanation lurking somewhere in the shadows. Tell me this meeting last night. How many visitors, and did they all depart at a reasonable hour?" 3 gentlemen from London, my lord. Came down on the afternoon train and left on the last service back to town, the 10:25. Wimsey's eyebrow arched with interest. "The 10:25? How precise? And Sir Ambrose was alive when they departed?" "So far as anyone knows, my lord, though—" Briggs hesitated, clearly wrestling with something that didn't fit neatly into his conception of proper police procedure. "Yes?" "Well, my lord, there's been talk in the village. Strange lights seen in the hall at all hours. and Sir Ambrose asking odd questions about locks and security. Some folk are saying he was dabbling in things best left alone. How deliciously Gothic, Wimsey murmured. Nothing quite like a touch of the occult to enliven a perfectly ordinary murder. Though I suspect our dragon's head, for all its apparent supernatural properties, will prove to have been guided by entirely human hands. He rose, stubbing out his barely smoked cigarette with decisive precision. I think, Constable, that I should very much like to make the acquaintance of this remarkable artifact. Medieval bronzework can be quite revealing about the circumstances of its deployment. As they prepared to venture out into the persistent drizzle, Wimsey paused at the threshold. One final question, if you please. This maid who discovered the body, I trust her movements have been properly accounted for? Oh, yes, my lord. Mary Kettle, been with the family 15 years. She was in the kitchen all morning preparing breakfast. Cook can vouch for her. How reassuringly domestic, Wimsey observed, though I've found that the most perfectly vouched for alibis often conceal the most ingenious crimes. Still, one mustn't prejudge. Shall we go and see what tale this dragon has to tell? I have a feeling it may prove more loquacious than its current silence suggests. The rain continued its methodical assault on the countryside as they set out for Headland's Court, and Wimsey found himself humming a fragment of Palestrina, his mind already beginning to arrange the scattered pieces of what promised to be a most intriguing puzzle. Dragons, after all, were notoriously fond of riddles. Headland's Court revealed itself through the November mist like a reproach to architectural restraint, its grey stone facade bearing the accumulated additions of 3 centuries. The original Elizabethan core had sprouted wings and turrets with the enthusiasm of a family determined to leave their mark on posterity, resulting in a structure that appeared to have been designed by committee and executed by optimists. Built in stages, one observes, Wimsey remarked as they approached the imposing entrance, each generation adding their own interpretation of grandeur. Rather like a palimpsest in stone, though considerably less legible. Inspector Parker emerged from the main door as their footsteps crunched on the gravel, his lean figure cutting a familiar silhouette against the weathered oak. "Peter," he called with evident relief, "I rather hoped you'd turn up. This business has all the hallmarks of the sort of puzzle that keeps one awake at night, staring at the ceiling and wondering whether one's lost one's grip on the fundamentals of detection. My dear Charles, you flatter my reputation for solving the insoluble," Wimsey replied, though his pale eyes had already begun their methodical survey of the building's facade. "I'm here purely by chance, having been correcting the landlord's heraldic shortcomings when Constable Briggs mentioned this fascinating case of gravitationally challenged bronzework. They entered through a hall that spoke of centuries of accumulated dignity, all dark paneling and ancestral portraits whose subjects regarded the living with that particular blend of superiority and disappointment common to the deceased gentry. The air carried the familiar scent of beeswax and old wood, overlaid now with something less pleasant, the metallic tang that violent death leaves in enclosed spaces, the dragon's testimony. The long gallery stretched the entire length of the house's upper floor, its mullioned windows casting rectangles of grey light across polished oak boards. Maritime artifacts lined the walls like trophies from some nautical campaign, sextants, a ship's bell, weathered compass roses, and, dominating them all, a gap in the display where something substantial had clearly been mounted. Sir Ambrose Vale lay beneath a white sheet near the gallery's eastern end, positioned directly below the empty mounting brackets. The dragon's head itself rested nearby on the Persian carpet, its bronze surface gleaming with malevolent dignity despite its fall from grace. It was indeed a magnificent piece, some 3 feet in length, with elaborately carved scales and eyes that seemed to follow one's movement with ancient malice. 16th century Venetian work, I should judge, Wimsey observed, crouching beside the artifact with the reverence of a connoisseur, possibly from the workshop of Alessandro Vittoria, though the treatment of the scales suggests a later imitator. Quite valuable, and certainly heavy enough to accomplish the deed. He rose, his gaze travelling to the mounting brackets above. The question, naturally, is how it managed to detach itself from what appear to be perfectly sound fixtures. Parker lifted the sheet briefly, revealing a man in his 60s whose scholarly features bore the refined stamp of a lifetime spent among books and antiquities. The wound to his skull was consistent with the fall of a heavy object, though Wimsey noted with interest that Sir Ambrose remained fully dressed in his dinner clothes. Hadn't been to bed by all appearances, Parker observed. Still wearing his evening dress from the night before. How curious. One might expect a gentleman to change after entertaining guests, particularly if he intended to retire. Wimsey moved to examine the mounting brackets, running his fingers along the ironwork with surgical precision. Solid as the foundations of Westminster Abbey, he murmured. No signs of tampering, no stress fractures, no indication these brackets were ever designed to fail. Yet fail they did, with remarkably convenient timing. He knelt again beside the bronze head, his monocle catching the wan light as he examined its surface. On the lower jaw, where the teeth curled in eternal snarl, a thread of something pale clung almost invisibly to the metal. Fibre, he observed to the middle distance. Hemp, I should say, or possibly the string from a parcel containing someone's good intentions. He did not touch it, but made a small gesture that Parker interpreted correctly. "I'll have the photographer document it before removal," Parker said quietly. Their examination was interrupted by the arrival of the butler, a man whose funereal dignity seemed to have been cultivated through decades of practice. He approached with the measured tread of one accustomed to bearing bad news, with appropriate solemnity. "Mordaunt, my lord," he announced himself with a slight bow. "I have been butler to Sir Ambrose these 15 years. Inspector Parker has requested that I make myself available for questioning." "Excellent," Wimsey replied. "I find that butlers possess an almost supernatural awareness of household rhythms. Tell me, Mordaunt, about last evening's entertainment." "Sir Ambrose received 3 gentlemen from London," Mordaunt recited with practiced precision. "Persons of education and substance, connected with the antiquarian trade. There was conversation in the library, and afterwards here in the gallery concerning the collection. I served coffee at 9 o'clock precisely. The gentleman departed at 9:15 to catch the 10:25 at St. Bede's station. And Sir Ambrose's condition when they left?" "In excellent spirits, my lord, though perhaps somewhat agitated by certain questions raised regarding the provenance of particular pieces." Mordaunt's expression remained diplomatically neutral. Mr. Fenning had expressed certain reservations about the authenticity of this very dragon's head. Wimsey's eyebrow arched with interest. How fascinatingly contentious. And after their departure, Sir Ambrose desired no further attendance. "I secured the house at 11 o'clock. At 20 minutes past by the hall clock, I heard movement in the gallery overhead." "You recognize Sir Ambrose's step?" "I am familiar with the household sounds, my lord," Mordaunt replied with mild dignity. "At 1:30 I extinguished the lamps below and retired. Sir Ambrose could manage the gallery lighting himself. And the morning's discovery." Here Mordaunt's composure showed its first crack. "Most distressing, my lord. Mary Kettle, the housemaid, came running to the kitchen in great distress. When I investigated, I found what you see here. Mary Kettle proved to be a small, nervous woman whose hands twisted perpetually at her apron strings. She had clearly been crying, and her voice emerged as barely more than a whisper. I took up the morning tea at 10:30. My lord, same as always when master said he would be late rising," she recited, eyes fixed on the carpet. "But when I reached the gallery door, it was standing ajar." "Ajar?" Wimsey's tone sharpened slightly. "You're quite certain?" "Oh, yes, my lord. Most unusual it was. Sir Ambrose always kept the gallery locked at night, regular as clockwork. Said the drafts were bad for his manuscripts. But there it was, just standing open, and when I looked in—" She gestured helplessly toward the scene of tragedy. "And you entered how, precisely?" "Through the door, my lord. It was already open, as I said." Wimsey exchanged a glance with Parker. "The door was unlocked and ajar when you arrived." "Yes, my lord, though—" Mary hesitated, her face coloring. "Though I did notice the west window was unlatched. Had to secure it proper, I did, or the curtains would blow something dreadful." The technical evidence Wimsey moved immediately to the window Mary had mentioned, examining the frame with minute attention. There, in the pale light, were 2 faint crescents where moisture had lifted dust from the sill, the unmistakable marks of hands gripping the frame from outside. "Salt," he murmured, touching his finger to the residue and tasting it delicately. "From last night's sea mist, I fancy. And observe, Charles, on the inner sill a scrape mark. Someone entered here with sufficient courtesy to wipe their boots on the inner mat." Parker joined him at the window, noting the evidence with professional interest. "Which suggests either a remarkably tidy burglar or—" or someone familiar enough with the household to know Sir Ambrose's preferences regarding muddy floors, Wimsey finished. He tested the window latch, which moved with suspicious ease. This mechanism has been recently adjusted. See the fresh oil on the pivot? Someone has been ensuring smooth operation. He turned his attention to the bell pull beside the door, giving it an experimental tug. No sound emerged from anywhere in the house. The bell wire, I perceive, has suffered an unfortunate severance, he observed. When did this occur, Mordaunt? 3 weeks past, my lord. Sir Ambrose declined to have it repaired, claiming the workmen would create excessive drafts. Yet someone rang a bell this morning, Wimsey mused. Cook mentioned hearing the dressing bell at 20 minutes to 8. Curious, given that the gallery wire is severed and Sir Ambrose was found here, presumably having spent the night in this very room. The implications of this observation settled over the group like a chill from the sea. Somewhere in the house a clock chimed the half-hour with measured precision, and Wimsey smiled with the satisfaction of a man who had just heard a particularly revealing piece of testimony. Time, he murmured, is often the most reliable witness in cases of this nature. Though in this house, I suspect, even time may prove to have been corrupted by human agency. He moved once more to the dragon's head, regarding it with something approaching affection. Our bronze friend here has begun to tell his tale, Charles. The question is whether we possess sufficient wit to interpret the remainder of his testimony. The grey afternoon light continued to fade as Wimsey completed his preliminary examination, and somewhere in the depths of the house another clock struck a different hour entirely. The sound seemed to please him enormously. Wimsey's attention, having been thoroughly captured by the dragon's head and its mysterious descent, now turned to what he considered the more pressing mechanical puzzle, the matter of the gallery door. He examined the brass escutcheon with the delicate precision of a clockmaker, his monocle catching the wan afternoon light. The keyhole shows no violence whatsoever, he observed to Parker, running his finger along the polished metal. No scratches, no bright marks where impatient tools have worried at the mechanism. Yet Mary found the door ajar this morning, and Mordaunt assures us Sir Ambrose was most particular about locking this room. The key itself? Parker inquired, lifting the fold of Sir Ambrose's waistcoat and finding nothing. Not on his person, which presents us with a delightful paradox, Wimsey murmured, crouching to examine the threshold. Mordaunt, maintaining his funeral dignity despite the increasingly pointed nature of the inquiry, cleared his throat. Sir Ambrose carried the gallery key on a small ring with his manuscript cabinet key, my lord. Most particular about it he was. Never allowed the maids to dust without his personal supervision. Then we must locate this key, Wimsey declared, though his tone suggested he found the prospect less than urgent. But first, I should like to understand the household's rhythms more completely. Mrs. Bright, the cook, received them in her domain with the conscious virtue of one whose accounts had remained straight through wars and influenza alike. Her arms, formidable as rolling pins, were currently engaged in kneading what appeared to be tomorrow's bread with therapeutic violence. The dressing bell. Mrs. Bright, Wimsey began conversationally, accepting the offered tea, as though kitchens were his natural habitat. You heard it at 20 minutes to 8 this morning. Plain as pudding, my lord. 2 strokes pause, then 2 more, just as always when Sir Ambrose wanted his hot water. I told Mary to get a move on, though she said it couldn't be on account of the gallery wire being broken these 3 weeks past. And you're quite certain of the sound? Parker pressed. There's the library bell to the pantry and the tradesman's bell at the side door, Mrs. Bright replied with the authority of long experience. But the dressing bell has its own note, it does. Though I will say Sir Ambrose had taken to striking that great ship's bell in the gallery when he was in one of his moods. Said he was keeping watch like a proper sailor. How nautically inclined of him, Wimsey observed. And these moods, recent developments. Now and again he'd be all for sea stories, and striking the bell every half hour till Mordaunt asked him civil-like if the house might be permitted to sleep. But we've had none of that these 3 weeks. Only questions about bolts and latches, and Pottle the smith called in to see to the west window. Ease it, Sir Ambrose told him, for it sticks something dreadful. Jarvis, the chauffeur, possessed the lean melancholy of a man who had witnessed the decline of proper horsemanship in favour of mechanical contrivances. He stood in the stable-yard with a chamois cloth and the air of perpetual professional disapproval. You drove the London gentlemen yesterday evening, Parker began. Aye, sir. Brought them from St. Bede's station at 5:40. took them back at 9:15 sharp. Had a small valise between them, brown leather, no great weight. Mr. Fenning, the thin one, came back out after the others had settled in the motor. Said he'd left his gloves. He returned to the house alone. Wimsey's interest sharpened. Alone, my lord. Sir Ambrose was at the door seeing them off. Watched the other two step into the motor, then went back inside when Fenning went after his gloves. I saw light in the long gallery window then, just a glimpse before the curtains were drawn. And the journey to the station? Caught the 10:25 neat as you please. Mr. Fenning nearly missed the step. Seemed in a powerful hurry, he did. The porter had to shove them along proper. Jarvis paused, his expression altering by the smallest degree. Sir Ambrose, after they'd gone, he stood at the door a moment and said, "We'll have the truth of you yet," like he was speaking to someone who wasn't there. The nature of the previous evening's controversy began to emerge through careful questioning of the household staff. Mordaunt, when pressed for details, revealed that the meeting had been far from cordial. There was considerable disagreement regarding the authentication of several pieces. My lord, Mr. Fenning, a dealer of some reputation from Chancery Lane, expressed grave doubts about the dragon's head, called it a 19th century pastiche designed to deceive the unwary. Sir Ambrose was incandescent with rage. And the other gentlemen, Mr. Hartwell and Mr. Blackwood. Mr. Hartwell attempted to mediate, my lord. A scholarly gentleman from the Hilliard Institute, who catalogues bronze work. But Mr. Blackwood seemed to find the entire situation amusing. Made some remark about chickens coming home to roost, though I couldn't fathom his meaning. Wimsey exchanged a significant glance with Parker. A journalist, this Mr. Blackwood? So I understood, my lord. Writes about scandals among collectors, according to Sir Ambrose, most theatrical in his manner. A brief consultation with the village postmistress, Mrs. Crumpet, revealed additional intelligence of considerable interest. Her establishment served as the unofficial clearinghouse for all matters of local concern, and she regarded postal privacy as a modern affectation. Sir Ambrose had been receiving a great deal of correspondence lately, she confided with professional authority, legal-looking envelopes from London mostly, and that Mr. Blackwood had been writing to him regular for months, weekly letters, sometimes more frequent, always marked private and confidential. Blackwood corresponded with Sir Ambrose before their meeting. Oh yes, my lord. Sir Ambrose would collect them personally, never let young Tom deliver to the hall like usual, acting most secretive about the whole business. The physical evidence accumulates. Returning to the gallery, Wimsey conducted a more thorough examination of the ship's bell at the far end of the room. He set it swinging once, gently, and it responded with a bright, precise note that seemed oddly cheerful given the circumstances. Salt residue on the clapper, he observed, and a fresh scratch on the lip. Someone has handled this within the last 12 hours, with a ring perhaps, or a careless buckle. He moved to the mounting brackets where the dragon's head had hung, running his fingers along the ironwork with surgical precision. Feel here, Charles. A smear of wax, and on the upper edge, close to the inner screw, a minute nick in the finish recently made. Our bronze friend did not tear itself free through natural causes. The hemp fibre on the dragon's jaw gleamed accusingly in the failing light, and Wimsey crouched beside it, with the reverence of a scholar examining a particularly revealing manuscript. Sailor's cordage, he murmured. One could pass such a line around the lower mandible, lead it up and over that sacrificial nick in the bracket, and, given a deft jerk at precisely the right moment, persuade even the most securely mounted artifact to change its allegiance to gravity. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, the various testimonies began to reveal discrepancies that troubled Parker's methodical mind. The guests departed at 9:15, he summarized, yet Mordaunt heard movement in the gallery at 11:15. That provides a 2-hour window during which Sir Ambrose was supposedly alone. Unless, Wimsey observed mildly, Mordaunt was mistaken about the identity of the person moving about upstairs, or about the time, or indeed about the actual departure of all the guests. He wandered to the west window, examining once more the faint marks on the sill where someone had gripped the frame from outside. Salt from the sea mist, he confirmed, deposited within the last 12 hours, and observed the scrape mark on the inner sill. Someone entered here with sufficient courtesy to wipe their boots before proceeding. Which suggests familiarity with household customs, Parker noted. Or remarkable consideration for domestic sensibilities in a murderer, Wimsey agreed. Though I've found that the most courteous criminals often prove the most dangerous. They understand the value of maintaining appearances until the very moment when appearances cease to matter. As they prepared to conclude their initial investigation, Wimsey stood once more beneath the empty mounting brackets, his pale eyes bright with the particular satisfaction of a man beginning to perceive order within chaos. "We have, Charles, a most intriguing collection of contradictions," he observed. "A locked door found ajar, a broken bell that somehow rang this morning, a dragon's head that fell through mechanical impossibility, and 3 London visitors whose departure may not have been as final as initially supposed." He paused, listening to the distant sound of the church bell tolling the hour. Time, as I've mentioned before, is often the most reliable witness in matters of this nature. Though in this house I suspect even time may have been corrupted by human agency. The grey afternoon light continued to fade as they made their way downstairs, and somewhere in the depths of the house, another clock struck a different hour entirely. Wimsey smiled with quiet satisfaction. The sound seemed to please him enormously. "Our bronze dragon has begun to tell his tale," he murmured to Parker. "The question now is whether we possess sufficient wit to interpret the remainder of his testimony. I have a feeling that before this matter is resolved, we shall discover that truth, like bronze work, is often more complex in its construction than initial examination might suggest." The mist rolled in from the sea with gathering purpose, and the lights of Headlands Court gleamed through the November gloom, like eyes keeping watch over secrets that daylight had failed to illuminate. In the gallery above, the empty mounting brackets waited with mechanical patience for someone to explain their sudden failure to perform their appointed duty. The morning air carried the sharp clarity that follows a night of cleansing rain, and Wimsey arrived at Headlands Court with the satisfied expression of a man who had spent the intervening hours in profitable contemplation of mechanical impossibilities. He found Parker in the library, surrounded by correspondence that spoke eloquently of Sir Ambrose's increasingly desperate circumstances. "I trust you slept well, Charles?" Wimsey inquired, settling into a leather chair with fluid grace. "I myself passed a most instructive night, pondering the curious properties of bronze work and the even more curious habits of those who collect it." Parker gestured to the papers spread across the mahogany desk. "Sir Ambrose's correspondence proves illuminating. Our Mr. Blackwood had been conducting what amounts to a campaign of literary terrorism for months. These letters suggest he possessed documentation that would have destroyed Sir Ambrose's reputation entirely." "How deliciously contentious," Wimsey murmured, examining a particularly vitriolic missive. "Though I confess myself more immediately fascinated by questions of chronology. Tell me, Charles, have you had occasion to compare the various timepieces in this house with any degree of scientific precision?" Their first expedition led them through the persistent November mist to St. Bede's Station, where the morning train had already deposited its quota of commercial travellers, and returned to London with mechanical punctuality. The station master, Mr. Worsley, received them in his office with the conscious dignity of a man whose ledgers had never shown a discrepancy. "The 10:25 to London yesterday evening," he confirmed, consulting his registers with obvious satisfaction. 3 first-class passengers, Messrs. Fenning, Hartwell and Blackwood. Porter Tom saw them aboard personally. Porter Tom, a freckled youth whose uniform appeared to have been tailored with optimistic expectations of future growth, added his testimony with evident pride in his memory. "Mr. Fenning nearly missed the train, sir. Came running back onto the platform at the last moment, puffing something dreadful. Had to wave him through the barrier myself. And you're quite certain all 3 gentlemen departed?" Wimsey inquired with deceptive casualness. "Saw them into their compartments myself, my lord. Whistle at 10:23, away at 10:25. Not a second's deviation from the timetable." Wimsey's pale eyes brightened with interest. "I don't suppose there were any telegrams dispatched around that time." Worsley's chest swelled with professional pride. "1 telegram, my lord. Sent by Mr. Blackwood at 10:19 to an address in Fleet Street. Coming through tonight, stop all well-stop schedule as arranged. Paid in silver and requested change in copper coins, most particular about it." He was. Returning to Headlands Court, Wimsey embarked upon what he termed a systematic assault upon temporal accuracy. The house, it emerged, harbored no fewer than 7 timepieces, each maintaining its own interpretation of the hour with stubborn individuality. Fascinating, he observed, moving from the hall's grandfather clock to the library's bracket timepiece to the morning room's delicate French carriage clock. The grandfather clock runs 15 minutes fast. The bracket clock shows 12 minutes slow, and this charming French confection has stopped entirely at 23 minutes past 11. Parker consulted his own watch with growing bewilderment. The variations seem almost deliberately maintained. Indeed, and Mrs. Bright assures me that her kitchen clock, the household's supposed temporal authority, has kept perfect time for 30 years. Yet it consistently shows 15 minutes behind the hall clock, the discrepancy that Sir Ambrose allegedly found useful for maintaining punctuality. Wimsey produced his pocket watch, a precision instrument synchronized with Greenwich Observatory. When Mordaunt heard movement in the gallery at 20 minutes past 11 by the hall clock, the kitchen clock would have registered 5 minutes past 11. When Mrs. Bright heard the mysterious dressing bell at 20 minutes to 8 by her kitchen chronometer, the hall clock would have shown 5 minutes to 8. The implications being that in a house where time itself has been rendered negotiable, witness testimony becomes a matter of interpretation rather than fact. Most convenient for someone wishing to establish a flexible alibi. In the long gallery, the morning light revealed subtleties that yesterday's investigation had missed. Wimsey knelt beside the Persian carpet, with the reverence of an archaeologist examining ancient artifacts, his monocle catching the pale sunshine as he studied the intricate weave. "Observe the compression pattern where our bronze friend made contact," he said, indicating the area near where the dragon's head had been discovered. "The impact has indeed compressed the pile, but notice this curious detail. The pattern suggests the object struck at an oblique angle, not the perpendicular descent one would expect from a simple gravitational fall." He moved his examination to the space immediately beneath the mounting brackets. "And here, Charles, we encounter something even more revealing. The carpet shows unmistakable signs of recent rearrangement, not the violent disruption of catastrophic impact, but the careful smoothing one performs after moving furniture." Parker crouched beside him, following Wimsey's pointing finger. Someone attempted to conceal evidence of deliberate positioning? Someone with sufficient domestic sensibility to understand that disturbed carpets provide testimony to observant investigators. Yet they failed to account for the varying depths of pile compression. This section bears the distinctive heel marks of someone wearing shoes with metal reinforcement. Note these small crescent-shaped indentations. Wimsey's attention shifted to the ship's bell at the gallery's eastern end, approaching it with the systematic precision of a forensic scientist. He examined the mounting bracket, tested the clapper mechanism, and finally scrutinized the bell rope with minute attention. "Most illuminating," he murmured, producing a small pair of tweezers from his case. "Embedded in the rope's weave, we find several fibers that decidedly do not belong to the original cordage. Brown wool, I should judge, consistent with a gentleman's winter overcoat." He set the bell swinging gently, listening to its clear note with the concentration of a musician tuning an instrument. The tone remains pure, the mechanism perfectly sound. Yet Mrs. Bright heard this bell ring at 20 minutes to 8 this morning, despite Sir Ambrose being discovered deceased in this very chamber. Either our victim possessed remarkable posthumous energy, or someone else found occasion to manipulate this signal system. The west window, scene of yesterday's discovery of suspicious moisture marks, yielded additional secrets under systematic examination. Wimsey tested the latch mechanism repeatedly, noting its suspiciously smooth operation. "Recently oiled and adjusted, as we observed yesterday," he confirmed, "but more significantly, deliberately modified. The catch has been filed to reduce its engagement by perhaps 1/16 of an inch, sufficient to allow the window to appear secure while remaining easily opened from outside with minimal force." He examined the window frame itself, running his gloved fingers along the painted wood with surgical precision. Fresh scratches here, where someone has repeatedly practiced the opening motion. This modification represents careful preparation over an extended period, weeks, possibly months of patient work, suggesting elaborate premeditation, or at minimum, the establishment of a reliable alternative means of access that would not disturb the household's normal routines, though I remain puzzled by the courtesy shown in wiping one's boots before entering. It suggests either remarkable consideration for domestic sensibilities or— He paused, his expression brightening with sudden insight. Mary Kettle, when recalled for additional questioning, proved to possess observations that had been overlooked in yesterday's emotional atmosphere. She stood in the morning room with her hands clasped before her, but her voice carried new steadiness. The gallery door— My lord, when I found it standing ajar yesterday morning, I noticed the key was still in the lock, but turned only halfway, like someone had been interrupted while securing the room. Wimsey's pale eyes sharpened with interest. Halfway turned? You observed this precisely? Yes, my lord. Most unusual, for Sir Ambrose was particular about his keys, always removed them complete, and kept them on his personal ring. I thought it strange enough that I turned it proper before fetching Mordaunt. Most understandable, though regrettable for our investigation. Now regarding the west window, was it merely unlatched or standing actually open? Standing open several inches, my lord, with the curtain billowing something fierce. The morning mist had dampened the sill considerable. I had to pull it shut and work the latch firm to make it catch proper. As the morning progressed, Wimsey's systematic examination of the gallery's various mechanical elements began to reveal a coherent pattern of careful preparation. The dragon's head mounting, the window latch, the bell rope, even the carpet's arrangement, all bore signs of recent attention by someone intimately familiar with the room's normal condition. We are confronting a methodical intelligence. Charles, he observed, standing once more beneath the empty mounting brackets, someone who understood not merely the physical requirements of the crime, but the psychological necessities of maintaining convincing appearances. He produced his notebook and began sketching the gallery's layout with precise attention to mechanical details. The sequence becomes increasingly clear with each revelation. Our murderer required reliable access without disturbing household routines, means of summoning assistance at the appropriate moment, and a method of ensuring the victim would be positioned correctly when the fatal instant arrived. The bell rope provides the summoning mechanism, Parker noted. Indeed, though carefully muffled to prevent premature discovery, the window provides access without alerting the domestic staff. And our bronze dragon— He paused, regarding the artifact with something approaching professional admiration. Our bronze friend represents not merely the murder weapon, but the cornerstone of an alibi that depends entirely upon the precise manipulation of time itself. Wimsey moved to the French carriage clock on the writing desk, examining its stopped mechanism with the attention of a horologist. This timepiece ceased functioning at exactly 23 minutes past 11, the precise moment Mordaunt claims to have heard the last sounds from the gallery. Yet the mechanism shows no signs of natural failure. He opened the clock's case with delicate precision. The mainspring remains properly wound, the escapement functions perfectly, yet something caused it to stop at that exact moment. Observe this minute scratch on the minute hand. Fresh metal, suggesting recent contact with a foreign object. Someone deliberately stopped the clock? Someone ensured it would provide corroborating testimony for a specific timeline. Most ingenious, really, a mechanical witness that cannot be cross-examined or intimidated into changing its story. The pale November sun continued its journey across the gallery windows, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across the scene of carefully orchestrated deception. Wimsey stood in contemplative silence, his hands clasped behind his back, listening to the house's various clocks marking their individual interpretations of time's passage. We have assembled, Charles, a most elegant collection of mechanical contradictions, he announced with evident satisfaction. A house where time itself has been rendered negotiable, where bells ring without human agency, where windows appear secure while remaining accessible, and where bronze artifacts fall through apparent defiance of physical law. He turned toward the door, his expression bright with intellectual appetite. The beauty of this deception lies not in its complexity, but in its fundamental simplicity. Someone has constructed an elaborate theatrical performance, complete with mechanical stage effects and carefully timed revelations. The question now becomes, which of our London visitors possessed both the technical knowledge and the dramatic sensibility to orchestrate such an ambitious production. As they prepared to leave the gallery, the ship's bell gave a single, tremulous note in response to some imperceptible draft, and Wimsey paused to listen with the attention of a conductor hearing the opening phrase of a familiar symphony. "Our bronze dragon grows increasingly loquacious," he murmured to Parker. "Soon, I suspect, it will sing us the entire aria of its mechanical betrayal. And when it does, we shall discover that truth, like precision clockwork, depends entirely upon the proper alignment of all its component parts." The investigation continued with methodical precision, but Wimsey's growing confidence suggested that the moment of revelation approached with the inexorability of a well-wound chronometer, marking the hours toward an appointed destiny. The morning light revealed Wimsey in the library of Headlands Court, surrounded by railway timetables, telegraph forms, and a collection of pocket watches, arranged with the precision of a horologist's workshop. He had commandeered Sir Ambrose's mahogany desk for what he termed a systematic assault upon the tyranny of temporal testimony, and the results promised to be illuminating. The fundamental difficulty, Charles, he observed, consulting his leather-bound notebook with the satisfaction of a mathematician approaching an elegant proof, lies not in what our witnesses observed, but in when they claim to have observed it. Time in this particular establishment has been weaponized with considerable sophistication. Parker joined him at the desk, noting the precise annotations that covered several sheets of foolscap. The station records confirm the London visitor's departure on the 10:25, yet we have Mrs. Bright's testimony about the dressing bell 40 minutes after Sir Ambrose was discovered dead. Precisely. The sort of temporal impossibility that suggests deliberate manipulation of chronological evidence, Wimsey agreed, though I confess myself equally intrigued by the mechanical requirements of such an elaborate deception. Wimsey had spent the early hours conducting what he described as a geographical audit of criminal possibility. His calculations, spread across the desk in neat columns, revealed the precise mechanics of movement between Headlands Court and the outside world. From the Hall to St. Bede's Station, exactly 3 miles and 7 furlongs by the direct carriage route, he announced, tapping his pencil against the measurements. Jarvis, driving the Daimler at reasonable speed over country roads, requires precisely 22 minutes for the journey, including the business of depositing passengers and securing their luggage. He traced an alternative route on the Ordnance Survey map with his finger. However, there exists the old coastal footpath, considerably shorter for a pedestrian willing to brave uncertain footing in November darkness. 2 miles exactly, navigable in 45 minutes by someone familiar with the terrain and possessed of reasonable athleticism. Most significantly, he continued, his pale eyes brightening with intellectual satisfaction, this coastal route passes directly beneath the west window of the long gallery, a circumstance that would prove remarkably convenient for someone requiring discreet access after establishing an apparent alibi at the railway station, armed with a precision chronometer borrowed from the village jeweler. Wimsey embarked upon what he termed a systematic interrogation of temporal accuracy. The results, documented with scientific precision, revealed the full extent of the household's chronological corruption. Every timepiece in this establishment has been calibrated to support a carefully constructed deception, he announced, moving from room to room with the methodical attention of a surveyor. The hall clock maintains a consistent 15-minute advancement. The kitchen clock shows 15 minutes retardation, while the library bracket clock varies by precisely 12 minutes slow. He paused at the French carriage clock in the gallery, its hands frozen at 23 minutes past 11. This particular instrument ceased functioning not through natural failure, but through deliberate intervention. Observe the minute scratch on the minute hand, fresh metal, indicating recent contact with a foreign object inserted specifically to halt the mechanism at this precise moment. Parker examined the evidence with growing understanding. Creating a false timestamp to support the murderer's timeline. Indeed, when Mordaunt heard movement at 20 minutes past 11 by the hall clock, the actual time would have been 5 minutes past 11. Yet our French chronometer insists the critical moment occurred at 11:23, a discrepancy of 18 minutes that becomes crucial when reconstructing the sequence of events. Wimsey conducted a series of experiments that demonstrated the ingenuity of the murderer's preparation. Standing at the ship's bell in the gallery's eastern end, he struck it twice with deliberate pauses, then descended to the kitchen where Mrs. Bright confirmed. The sound matched her memory of the morning's mysterious dressing bell perfectly. The severed bell wire in the gallery rendered the traditional signal system inoperative, he explained, returning upstairs. Yet someone required the ability to summon household attention at a predetermined moment. Our nautical friend here provided the solution. He examined the bell rope with his magnifying glass, revealing the brown wool fibers embedded in its weave. These modifications allowed the bell to be operated remotely, most likely from the west window, using an extended cordage system that could be activated without entering the gallery proper. The telegraph's damning evidence a return consultation with the ear. Station master revealed the final piece of the temporal puzzle. Mr. Worsley, pleased to demonstrate his professional thoroughness, produced the telegraph log with evident satisfaction. Mr. Blackwood dispatched not one telegram yesterday evening, but two, Wimsey announced upon their return. The first at 10:19, as we knew, but a second at 11:47 to the same Fleet Street address. Package delivered, stop return delayed, stop, expect tomorrow. The timing. Charles is everything. He consulted his reconstructed timeline with the satisfaction of a conductor preparing a complex musical score. If Mr. Blackwood boarded the 10:25 at St. Bede's Station, he could not possibly have sent a telegram at 11:47 unless he had returned to the station by alternative means. The coastal footpath provides exactly such a route. Wimsey's final examination of the gallery revealed how each element of the deception had been orchestrated into a cohesive performance. The modified window latch, the extended bell pull system, the carefully positioned dragon's head, the strategically calibrated timepieces, all components of an elaborate theatrical production. Our murderer required three essential elements, he observed, standing beneath the empty mounting brackets. Reliable access without disturbing household routines, means of establishing a false timeline through mechanical witnesses, and a method of ensuring the victim would be positioned correctly when the fatal moment arrived. He demonstrated the rope system by threading a length of hemp cordage from the brackets prepared nick to the bell rope, then to the window embrasure. One individual operating from outside the window could simultaneously release the dragon's head and ring the summoning bell, creating the illusion of simultaneous events occurring at impossible intervals. As the morning progressed, Wimsey's systematic analysis revealed the true sequence of events with mathematical precision. He arranged his evidence chronologically, cross-referencing each testimony with the documented timepiece variations. The London visitors departed at 9:15, as Jarvis confirmed. They boarded the 10:25 at the station, witnessed by multiple sources. Yet one of them, Mr. Blackwood, judging by the telegraph evidence, returned via the coastal footpath, arriving at approximately 11:15 actual time. He traced the route on his map with forensic precision. This individual entered through the prepared west window, positioned the dragon's head using the rope system, departed again by the same route, and reached the station in time to dispatch his second telegram at 11:47. The entire operation required less than 45 minutes of actual presence at the scene. As the November morning faded toward afternoon, Wimsey stood at the west window, gazing across the mist-shrouded landscape toward the distant railway line. The coastal footpath remained clearly visible, its route marked by the distinctive clay that had betrayed the murderer's nocturnal journey. Time. Charles has indeed been corrupted by human agency, he murmured, consulting his pocket watch with quiet satisfaction. But like all mechanical deceptions, this one depends upon the precise coordination of its component parts. When one element fails to perform its appointed function, the entire edifice of deception collapses. He smiled with the particular satisfaction of a man whose theories had achieved mechanical precision. Our bronze dragon has completed its confession of systematic betrayal. The question now becomes whether our absent virtuoso possesses sufficient confidence in their temporal manipulations to risk a return engagement. The investigation had reached that critical juncture where accumulated evidence must transform into demonstrable proof. and Wimsey's growing certainty suggested that the moment of theatrical revelation approached, with the inexorability of a perfectly calibrated chronometer marking the hours toward justice. The house seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the final act of this elaborately orchestrated performance to commence. The afternoon brought revelations that transformed Wimsey's understanding of the case from a study in mechanical ingenuity to an exploration of the profound psychological costs of sustained deception. His systematic examination of Sir Ambrose's private papers, recovered from a concealed safe behind the maritime charts, revealed a man whose entire existence had been constructed upon foundations of deliberate fraud and carefully maintained lies. Sir Ambrose Vale, Wimsey announced to Parker, brandishing a leather-bound journal with evident satisfaction, was not merely a gentleman antiquarian with questionable taste in bronze work. He was, it appears, a man whose entire identity represents perhaps the most ambitious piece of social engineering I have encountered in my considerable experience with human duplicity. The journal, written in Sir Ambrose's careful script, documented a transformation that had required decades of patient construction. Born Ambrose Rayner in Portsmouth, the son of a naval quartermaster, he had begun his career in the distinctly ungenteel profession of marine salvage, working the treacherous waters off the Devon coast, where merchant vessels frequently foundered on the hidden rocks. Parker examined the journal entries with growing fascination. He details operations that were clearly beyond the bounds of legal salvage work. Ships barely wrecked, cargo mysteriously relocated before official rescue arrived, and, in several cases, deliberate interference with distress signals to ensure vessels remained helpless until his crews could strip them of valuables. Note particularly the entries for November 1889, Wimsey observed, indicating a section marked with a black ribbon. The merchant vessel Diomede, carrying a cargo that included several crates of theatrical props destined for a London production company. Among the recovered items was what the manifest described as one bronze dragon's head, property of the Lyceum Theatre, value £15. The journal revealed that this theatrical prop, treated with chemicals to simulate centuries of maritime corrosion, had become the foundation of Sir Ambrose's subsequent transformation. When a visiting antiquarian mistook it for genuine Venetian bronze work, Rayner had recognized an opportunity for social advancement that extended far beyond mere financial gain. The subsequent entries documented a methodical campaign of self-reinvention that demonstrated remarkable psychological sophistication. Rayner had used his salvage profits to purchase genuine antiquities from legitimate dealers, carefully studying their provenance and authentication methods until he could speak with authority about periods and styles he had never formally studied. He created not merely a false identity, but an entire fictional personal history, Wimsey explained, turning to pages filled with genealogical charts and forged documentation. The Vale baronetcy, the Oxford education, even his supposed military service in India, all carefully constructed lies supported by purchased credentials and rehearsed anecdotes. The transformation had required the systematic elimination of everyone who had known Ambrose Rayner. He had relocated to Devon, claimed distant family connections to the local gentry, and gradually established himself as a scholarly recluse whose expertise in maritime antiquities explained any gaps in his social knowledge. Their investigation led them to the cottage of Mrs. Eleanor March, whose husband had been among the casualties of Rayner's illegal operations. She received them with the dignified composure of a woman who had long ago made her peace with injustice. But her testimony provided crucial insight into the psychological pressures that had ultimately led to murder. Tom March was diving on the Diomede when the lines fouled, she explained, her weathered hands steady as she poured tea. Rayner could have brought him up safe, but there was cargo still to be moved, and Tom had seen too much of what wasn't on the manifest. When they finally hauled him up, it was too late. She produced a faded photograph of her husband in his diving gear, and beside it, a more recent image that made Wimsey's pulse quicken with recognition. That gentleman came round last week, asking questions about the old days. Said he was writing about maritime disasters for the London papers. The photograph showed Blackwood, examining the cottage's fishing nets with obvious interest, his distinctive profile clearly visible. More significantly, strands of hemp cordage lay coiled beside him, the same type of rope that had been used to manipulate the dragon's head's fatal descent. Blackwood's correspondence, discovered among Sir Ambrose's papers, revealed a campaign of psychological terrorism conducted with journalistic precision. The journalist had spent months researching the Rayner identity, tracking down survivors of the salvage operations, and documenting the transformation from criminal to gentleman scholar. The beauty of Blackwood's approach, Wimsey observed, examining the increasingly threatening letters, lay in his understanding that Sir Ambrose's reputation was more valuable to him than life itself. The threat of exposure represented not merely professional ruin, but the complete annihilation of a carefully constructed identity that had required decades to establish. The final letter, dated 3 days before the murder, had essentially constituted an ultimatum. The public interest demands truth in scholarly matters. Your collection will be examined by independent experts, or the full story of Ambrose Rayner's maritime activities will appear in next week's edition. Hidden among Sir Ambrose's papers, Wimsey discovered a manila envelope that contained perhaps the most damning evidence yet uncovered. Inside lay a photographic plate and several prints showing the long gallery as seen from the west window. Clearly taken during the preparation of the murder scene, Blackwood documented his own crime, Wimsey announced with evident satisfaction, holding the photographs to the light. Light. Observe the rope system already in position, the dragon's head mounted but prepared for release, and most significantly, his own reflection in the window glass as he operated the camera. The photographs bore timestamps that corresponded exactly with the period when Blackwood was supposedly departing for London, providing irrefutable proof that he had remained at Headlands Court long after his apparent departure with Fenning and Hartwell. As the afternoon progressed, Wimsey's analysis revealed Sir Ambrose as a man whose sustained deception had ultimately consumed his authentic identity entirely. The careful construction of the gentleman-scholar persona had required such complete commitment that he had perhaps forgotten who he actually was beneath the elaborate performance. The tragedy, Wimsey observed, examining the victim's extensive collection of scholarly works, many annotated in his careful handwriting, lies not merely in his criminal past, but in the recognition that his transformation had achieved a kind of authenticity through sheer persistence. He had genuinely become the scholar he had pretended to be, making Blackwood's threatened exposure doubly cruel. The household staff's testimony revealed a man under increasing psychological pressure as Blackwood's investigation intensified. Mordaunt described Sir Ambrose spending sleepless nights in the gallery, apparently conducting conversations with invisible adversaries, while Mrs. Bright reported that he had begun referring to himself in the third person, as though discussing a character in a story. The journal's final entries documented Sir Ambrose's desperate attempts to construct a defense against Blackwood's threats. The modifications to the gallery, the prepared window latch, the rope system, the carefully calibrated timepieces, had originally been intended not for murder, but for an elaborate suicide designed to implicate his tormentor. He planned to destroy Blackwood through martyrdom, Wimsey explained, demonstrating the rope mechanism once more. By appearing to be murdered while Blackwood was demonstrably elsewhere, he would ensure his enemy faced charges of impossible murder, a scandal that would destroy the journalist's reputation even if legal proof remained elusive. However, Blackwood had anticipated this scheme, using his knowledge of the prepared mechanisms to turn Sir Ambrose's suicide apparatus into an actual murder weapon. The photographic evidence suggested he had spent considerable time studying the gallery's layout, understanding both the mechanical requirements and the psychological motivations that had driven their construction. The accumulated evidence painted a clear picture of the evening's events. After the apparent departure of all 3 London visitors, Blackwood had returned via the coastal footpath, entering through the prepared west window to find Sir Ambrose waiting in the gallery, perhaps hoping for a final negotiation. Instead, he had encountered a man whose psychological defenses had finally collapsed under the weight of decades of sustained deception. The confrontation had ended, with Blackwood using Sir Ambrose's own suicide mechanism against him, creating the perfect crime that exploited both the victim's mechanical preparations and his household's carefully maintained ignorance of his true identity. The murder, Wimsey concluded, represents the ultimate irony in a life constructed entirely upon ironies. Sir Ambrose died not as the gentleman scholar he had become, but as the criminal salvager he had tried to escape, destroyed by the very mechanisms he had prepared for his own theatrical redemption. As the November afternoon faded toward evening, the long gallery seemed to echo with the psychological complexity of the crime that had been committed within its walls. The empty mounting brackets and modified window bore silent testimony to the elaborate nature of human deception, while the bronze dragon's head rested nearby like a monument to the dangerous intersection of authentic scholarship and criminal ambition. The investigation had revealed not merely the mechanics of murder, but the profound human costs of living a completely fabricated existence where truth and fiction had become so thoroughly intertwined that their separation could only be achieved through violence. The stage was now set for Wimsey's final confrontation with a murderer, whose crime represented the logical conclusion of a lifetime spent manipulating truth for personal advantage. The accumulated evidence painted a clear picture of the evening's events. After the apparent departure of all three London visitors, Blackwood had returned via the coastal footpath, entering through the prepared west window to find Sir Ambrose waiting in the gallery, perhaps hoping for a final negotiation. Instead, he had encountered a man whose psychological defenses had finally collapsed under the weight of decades of sustained deception. The confrontation had ended, with Blackwood using Sir Ambrose's own suicide mechanism against him, creating the perfect crime that exploited both the victim's mechanical preparations and his household's carefully maintained ignorance of his true identity. The murder, Wimsey concluded, represents the ultimate irony in a life constructed entirely upon ironies. Sir Ambrose died not as the gentleman scholar he had become, but as the criminal salvager he had tried to escape, destroyed by the very mechanisms he had prepared for his own theatrical redemption. As the November afternoon faded toward evening, the long gallery seemed to echo with the psychological complexity of the crime that had been committed within its walls. The empty mounting brackets and modified window bore silent testimony to the elaborate nature of human deception, while the bronze dragon's head rested nearby like a monument to the dangerous intersection of authentic scholarship and criminal ambition. The investigation had revealed not merely the mechanics of murder, but the profound human costs of living a completely fabricated existence where truth and fiction had become so thoroughly intertwined that their separation could only be achieved through violence. The stage was now set for Wimsey's final confrontation with a murderer, whose crime represented the logical conclusion of a lifetime spent manipulating truth for personal advantage. The pale November morning brought Mary Kettle once more to the long gallery, her nervousness now tempered by a growing sense that her testimony might prove crucial to the investigation. Wimsey received her with that particular gentleness he reserved for witnesses whose observations had been dismissed as domestic trivialities, though his pale eyes suggested he expected revelations of considerable importance. "Mary," he began, settling into the window seat with fluid grace, "yesterday you mentioned a detail about the gallery door that I fear we may have overlooked in our initial examination. You said the key was turned only halfway when you discovered Sir Ambrose." Mary nodded, her hands twisting at her apron with familiar anxiety. "Yes, my lord. Most peculiar it was. Sir Ambrose always removed his keys complete and kept them on his ring. Never left them standing in the locks, on account of drafts affecting his manuscripts. But there it was, half turned toward locking, as if someone had been interrupted in the middle of securing the room. And you, quite naturally, completed the action before summoning Mordaunt?" "I did, my lord. Seemed only proper to set things right. Though now I wonder if I shouldn't have left it as I found it." Wimsey's expression brightened with the particular satisfaction of a man whose theories had received unexpected confirmation. "On the contrary, Mary, your domestic instincts have provided us with perhaps the most revealing piece of evidence yet uncovered. A half-turned key tells a story of interrupted action, either someone preventing Sir Ambrose from securing himself in the gallery, or someone wishing to create precisely that impression. Parker's systematic search of the gallery's window embrasures had yielded an artifact that transformed Wimsey's understanding of the crime's technical execution. Behind the heavy curtains of the west window, carefully concealed where casual observation might miss it, lay one of the household's silver salvers, bearing unmistakable signs of recent and unusual employment. "Observe the scratches along the rim." "Charles," Wimsey said, examining the piece with his magnifying glass. "Fresh marks in the silver, consistent with rope friction under considerable tension. And here," he indicated several dark stains along the salver's edge. "Verdigris from bronze, transferred during intimate contact with our dragon's head mounting system." The salver bore additional evidence of its role in the murder's mechanical aspects. Someone had wedged it beneath the dragon's head mounting bracket, creating a smooth-bearing surface that would allow rope to pass without fraying or catching on the sharp edges of the ironwork. The arrangement represented not merely criminal ingenuity, but a sophisticated understanding of mechanical principles. "Most significantly," Wimsey continued, extracting a brown fiber from the salver's surface with his tweezers, "we find embedded in the verdigris stain a fragment of wool consistent with the fibers discovered on the bell rope. Our murderer's sleeve brushed against the salver during the rope's positioning, leaving this textile signature of his presence." Wimsey's examination of the window sill revealed additional evidence that completed his understanding of the murderer's identity. The white residue he had initially attributed to sea salt proved under more sophisticated analysis to contain traces of silver bromide, the chemical signature of photographic processing. "Not mere salt from the evening mist," he announced, displaying the results of his chemical tests, but the residual evidence of our journalist's professional activities. Mr. Blackwood, it appears, brought more than mere threats to his final confrontation with Sir Ambrose. He brought the tools of his trade, camera, chemicals, and the documentary evidence necessary to destroy his victim's carefully constructed reputation. With the photographic chemicals provided irrefutable proof that Blackwood had indeed returned to Headlands Court after his apparent departure for London. The residue on the window-sill matched samples recovered from his hotel room, where the local constabulary had discovered a makeshift darkroom complete with developing equipment and several photographs of the gallery taken during previous visits. Armed with the salver and understanding its function, Wimsey demonstrated how the murder weapon had been deployed with mechanical precision. The silver-bearing surface had allowed Blackwood to position the hemp cordage so that a single sharp pull from outside the window would simultaneously release the dragon's head and ring the ship's bell. "The beauty of this system," Wimsey explained, threading rope through the arrangement, lay in its complete reliability once properly positioned. By wedging the salver beneath the mounting bracket and passing the cordage over its smooth surface, our murderer eliminated the risk of rope failure or unexpected binding that might have compromised his carefully planned timeline. The brown wool fibers found embedded in both the bell rope and the oar salver's verdigris stain provided additional confirmation of Blackwood's involvement. Chemical analysis revealed that the fibers matched samples from the journalist's overcoat, seized during the search of his London lodgings. The half-turned key, combined with the mechanical evidence, revealed the true sequence of events during Blackwood's nocturnal return to the gallery. Having established his apparent departure on the 10:25 train, he had returned via the coastal footpath to find Sir Ambrose waiting in the gallery, perhaps hoping for final negotiations regarding the threatened exposé. The confrontation occurred sometime after 11 o'clock actual time, Wimsey reconstructed, consulting his corrected chronology. Blackwood's attempt to photograph additional evidence of Sir Ambrose's fraudulent collection precipitated the struggle that ended with the victim's death. The half-turned key suggests Sir Ambrose attempted to lock himself in the gallery during the confrontation, but was prevented from completing the action. The positioning of the salver and rope system had been accomplished during this final visit, not as part of elaborate advance preparation, but as an improvised solution when Blackwood realized that Sir Ambrose's death would require careful staging to avoid immediate suspicion. Mrs. Bright's testimony about the dressing bell at 20 minutes to 8 took on new significance. When considered alongside the mechanical evidence, the ship's bell, operated remotely via the rope system, had been rung not to summon assistance for a living Sir Ambrose, but to ensure timely discovery of his body at a moment when Blackwood's alibi would be unshakable. The bell served as both murder weapon release mechanism and discovery signal, Wimsey explained. By calculating the household's morning routines, Blackwood ensured that the body would be found at precisely the moment that would make his involvement appear impossible. The timing represented not mere criminal cunning, but journalistic precision applied to the problem of establishing an unbreakable alibi. As the morning light strengthened in the gallery windows, Wimsey arranged his evidence with the satisfaction of a scholar who had successfully decoded a particularly complex manuscript. The salver, the photographic chemicals, the half-turned key, and the rope system formed a coherent narrative of premeditated murder executed with mechanical precision. Every seemingly insignificant detail, he observed to Parker, from the modified window latch to the carefully calibrated timepieces, now reveals its place in an elaborate performance designed to create the illusion of impossible crime. Mr. Blackwood did not merely murder Sir Ambrose, he directed a theatrical production in which mechanical props and carefully timed revelations combined to create what appeared to be supernatural intervention. The bronze dragon's head rested nearby, its ancient features seeming to regard the assembled evidence with metallic satisfaction. The artifact that had begun as a symbol of Sir Ambrose's fraudulent scholarship had become the instrument of justice, its mechanical testimony finally revealing the truth behind its fatal descent. As Wimsey completed his reconstruction of the crime's technical elements, the stage was set for the final act of this elaborate drama. The evidence formed an unbreakable chain, linking Blackwood to every aspect of the murder's execution, from the initial photographic reconnaissance to the final mechanical release of the bronze weapon. Our journalist friend has demonstrated considerable ingenuity in the construction of his alibi, Wimsey murmured, consulting his pocket watch with quiet satisfaction. The question now becomes whether his confidence in that elaborate deception will prove sufficient to bring him back for an encore performance. I have a feeling that Mr. Blackwood's theatrical sensibilities will not permit him to leave such a carefully orchestrated production without taking a final bow. The November morning continued its pale progression toward afternoon, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of an approaching motorcar suggested that the final act of this mechanical drama was about to commence. The gallery waited with the patient attention of a theatre prepared for its most crucial scene, while the empty mounting brackets bore silent witness to the moment when human ingenuity and criminal ambition would finally meet their inevitable reckoning. B.E. November afternoon had surrendered to an early dusk that pressed against the long gallery windows like a curious observer, eager to witness the final act of Wimsey's carefully orchestrated performance. He had spent the intervening hours transforming the scene of Sir Ambrose's death into what he termed a mechanical theatre of criminal methodology, complete with strategic lighting and precisely positioned evidence that would force the truth from even the most accomplished deceiver. The beauty of theatrical revelation, Charles, Wimsey observed, adjusting the angle of an oil lamp to cast dramatic shadows across the empty mounting brackets, lies not merely in the exposition of facts, but in the psychological pressure created by forcing the criminal to confront the mechanical reality of their own ingenuity. He had dispatched a carefully worded telegram to Mr. Blackwood's Fleet Street office, a masterpiece of journalistic temptation that promised an exclusive interview regarding startling new developments in the Vale affair and hinted at documentary evidence that would revolutionize public understanding of the case. The bait, Wimsey felt confident, would prove irresistible to a man whose professional reputation depended upon being first with sensational revelations. The long gallery had been transformed into a precise recreation of the murder night's conditions. The bronze dragon's head rested in its original position, the hemp cordage threaded through the silver salver-bearing system with mathematical precision, and the ship's bell prepared for its crucial mechanical testimony. Even the French carriage clock had been reset to 23 minutes past 11, its hands frozen at the moment when Blackwood had stopped its mechanism to create false temporal evidence. Every detail must be precisely as it was, Wimsey explained to Parker, testing the rope system's smooth operation over the polished salver surface. The murderer's confidence depends entirely upon his belief that the mechanical impossibility of his crime renders detection equally impossible. When confronted with a demonstration of how the impossible becomes merely ingenious, even the most accomplished criminal finds psychological equilibrium difficult to maintain. The west window had been set to its prepared position, apparently secure but actually accessible through the filed latch mechanism that Blackwood had so carefully prepared during his preliminary visits. The various timepieces throughout the house maintained their individual interpretations of the hour, creating the temporal confusion that had initially obscured the murder's true chronology. The sound of a motor car approaching through the mist announced Blackwood's arrival with mechanical punctuality. Wimsey positioned himself near the ship's bell, his pale eyes bright with anticipation as footsteps echoed in the hall below. Mordaunt's dignified voice carried up the stairwell, followed by the confident tread of a man who believed his elaborate alibi remained unshakable. Blackwood entered the gallery with the casual authority of a professional observer, his notebook already in hand, and his camera case slung over his shoulder with practiced ease. He surveyed the lamplit scene with apparent interest, though Wimsey noted the almost imperceptible tightening around his eyes as he recognized the precision of the mechanical reconstruction. "Lord Peter Wimsey," Blackwood said, extending his hand with journalistic cordiality. "Your telegram suggested developments of considerable significance. I trust this isn't merely another theoretical exercise in detection." "On the contrary, Mr. Blackwood," Wimsey replied, accepting the handshake while noting the faint stains of photographic chemicals on the journalist's fingers. "We have progressed far beyond theory into the realm of mechanical demonstration. I believe you'll find the results most illuminating." Wimsey approached the rope system with the fluid precision of a conductor preparing to direct a complex musical performance. The technical requirements of Sir Ambrose's murder proved quite straightforward. "Once one understood the mechanical principles involved," he began, his voice carrying the detached authority of a scientific lecturer. He demonstrated how the hemp cordage passed smoothly over the silver salver's polished surface, creating a friction-reducing bearing that allowed precise control of both the dragon's head release and the bell's operation from outside the window. A simple rope and pulley arrangement, utilizing the household's own domestic silver as a crucial mechanical component. Blackwood's professional composure showed its first microscopic crack as he watched Wimsey's methodical recreation of his own criminal ingenuity. The notebook remained poised, but his handwriting had developed a slight tremor that spoke eloquently of psychological pressure. "The timing naturally required considerable precision," Wimsey continued, adjusting the rope's position with surgical accuracy. The murderer needed to coordinate the weapon's release with the discovery signal, ensuring that household attention would be drawn to the gallery at precisely the moment when his alibi would be most convincingly established. Wimsey produced the manila envelope containing Blackwood's own photographic documentation of the crime scene preparation. The images, spread across Sir Ambrose's writing desk like exhibits in a court proceeding, showed the gallery from the west window perspective with damning clarity. "Most professional work, Mr. Blackwood," he observed with deceptive casualness, "though I confess myself puzzled by the timestamps. According to the station records, you departed on the 10:25. Yet these images bear clear evidence of having been taken well after that departure time." Blackwood examined the photographs with forced calm, his trained eye automatically assessing their technical quality, while his conscious mind struggled to formulate an explanation that wouldn't implicate him further. "I'm afraid I don't understand your implication, Lord Peter. These could have been taken by anyone with access to photographic equipment." "Indeed they could," Wimsey agreed pleasantly, though the chemical residue on the windowsill proves rather more specific in its testimony. Silver bromide, combined with the particular fixing agents favored by professional journalists, creates a distinctive signature that forensic analysis can identify with considerable precision. As Wimsey's demonstration progressed, the accumulated evidence began to create an atmosphere of inexorable revelation that pressed against Blackwood's carefully maintained composure like a rising tide. The journalist's responses had developed the mechanical quality of a man whose psychological defenses were under systematic assault. The most fascinating aspect of this crime, Wimsey observed, beginning to coil the rope system with deliberate precision, lies not in its mechanical complexity, but in its exploitation of Sir Ambrose's psychological vulnerabilities. The murderer understood that the threat of exposure represented not merely professional ruin, but the complete destruction of a carefully constructed identity. He paused in his demonstration, regarding Blackwood, with the clinical interest of a psychologist studying a particularly complex case. The tragedy, naturally, lies in recognizing that Sir Ambrose had achieved authentic transformation through sheer persistence. His scholarly expertise had become genuine, making the threatened exposure doubly cruel in its implications. Wimsey's final adjustment to the rope system created a configuration that would be intimately familiar to anyone who had operated it under similar circumstances. The cordage passed through the salver bearing with mechanical precision. The dragon's head rested in perfect position for release, and the ship's bell waited with metallic patience for its signal to ring. One final demonstration. "Mr. Blackwood," Wimsey announced, moving toward the west window with fluid grace. "Perhaps you would care to observe from the optimal vantage point how such a system might be operated by someone positioned outside the gallery." Blackwood's response provided the revelation Wimsey had been orchestrating throughout the entire demonstration. Instead of accepting the invitation to observe, the journalist moved instinctively toward the rope system itself, his hands reaching for the cordage with the automatic familiarity of someone who had operated it before under circumstances of considerable stress. The gesture lasted only a moment before conscious control reasserted itself, but it provided Wimsey with the final confirmation he required. The murderer's muscle memory had betrayed him, revealing through involuntary action what conscious deception had attempted to conceal. "Most illuminating, Mr. Blackwood," Wimsey murmured with quiet satisfaction, his pale eyes bright with intellectual triumph. "Your familiarity with the system's operation proves rather more intimate than one might expect from a casual observer. The question now becomes whether you prefer to discuss the details of your nocturnal return to Headlands Court voluntarily, or whether you would rather we proceed directly to the formal unmasking." The November evening pressed closer against the gallery windows, and somewhere in the house's depths, a clock struck the hour with mechanical precision. The stage was set for the final confrontation between criminal ingenuity and investigative persistence. While the bronze dragon's head waited with ancient patience for justice to complete its inexorable course toward truth, Blackwood stood frozen in the lamplight, his hand still extended toward the rope system, his face a mask of dawning recognition that his elaborate deception had finally met its match in Wimsey's methodical reconstruction of mechanical impossibility made manifest. The lamplight caught the tremor in Blackwood's extended hand as it hovered above the hemp cordage, and in that infinitesimal gesture, Wimsey read the complete confession of guilt. The journalist's carefully maintained composure flickered like a candle in a draught, revealing beneath its professional veneer the desperate calculations of a man whose elaborate deception had finally encountered its mathematical limits. "Most illuminating, Mr. Blackwood," Wimsey observed with the gentle precision of a surgeon making a crucial incision. "Your familiarity with the rope system's operation proves rather more intimate than casual observation might explain. The wrist turns with practiced economy. The fingers seek the precise angle of leverage. One acquires such muscle memory only through repeated operation under circumstances of considerable stress." Blackwood withdrew his hand with deliberate slowness, though the damage had been accomplished. "Professional curiosity, nothing more," he managed, his voice carrying that hollow ring that marks the moment when psychological defenses begin their inevitable collapse. "One naturally wishes to understand the mechanics of such an ingenious device." "Indeed," Wimsey agreed pleasantly, producing the manila envelope with its damning photographic contents. "Though your understanding extends considerably beyond mere curiosity. These images, Mr. Blackwood, document not observation but preparation. Note the timestamps, taken well after your supposed departure on the 10:25, yet showing the gallery from the west window perspective with remarkable clarity." He spread the photographs across Sir Ambrose's writing desk like evidence in a court proceeding. The chemical residue on the windowsill provides equally compelling testimony. Silver bromide, combined with your preferred fixing agents, creates a signature that forensic analysis identifies with mathematical precision. You returned, Mr. Blackwood, via the coastal footpath that passes directly beneath this very window. Parker stepped forward with the silver salver, its verdigris stains gleaming accusingly in the lamplight. This humble piece of domestic silver, Blackwood, proves perhaps the most eloquent witness to your ingenuity. Wedged beneath the mounting bracket, it provided the bearing surface for your rope system and collected brown wool fibers from your overcoat in the process. Blackwood's professional composure showed its first significant crack. "So you cannot possibly prove—" "On the contrary," Wimsey interrupted with characteristic mildness, "the proof has been accumulating with mechanical inevitability throughout our investigation. Your 2 telegrams alone provide irrefutable evidence of temporal impossibility. The first, dispatched at 10:19 from St. Bede's Station, announced your departure for London. The second, sent at 11:47 to the same Fleet Street address, confirmed package delivered and return delayed." He consulted his pocket watch with quiet satisfaction. "If you had indeed boarded the 10:25, Mr. Blackwood, you could not have dispatched that second telegram unless you possessed supernatural abilities. The coastal footpath, however, provides a perfectly natural explanation. 2 miles exactly, navigable in 45 minutes by someone familiar with the terrain and possessed of urgent motivation." As Wimsey's systematic exposition continued, Blackwood's carefully constructed facade began to crumble with gathering momentum. His notebook fell from nerveless fingers, scattering across the Persian carpet like fragments of his shattered alibi, while his face underwent that subtle transformation that marks the moment when criminal confidence surrenders to investigative inevitability. "The temporal deceptions alone demonstrate remarkable sophistication," Wimsey observed, moving to the French carriage clock frozen at 23 minutes past 11. "Every timepiece in this establishment has been calibrated to support your carefully constructed alibi. When Mordaunt heard movement at 20 minutes past 11 by the hall clock, the actual time was 5 minutes past 11. Yet this mechanical witness insists the critical moment occurred at 11:23, creating the precise temporal confusion necessary to make your presence appear impossible." He demonstrated the rope system once more, threading the hemp cordage over the silver salver's polished surface with surgical precision. One individual operating from outside the window could simultaneously release the dragon's head and ring the summoning bell, creating the illusion of supernatural intervention while maintaining an unshakable railway alibi. Blackwood moved to the west window, his fingers tracing the modified latch mechanism with the desperate gesture of a man seeking to reverse time itself. "I was going to destroy everything," he said, his voice gaining strength as the psychological dam finally burst. 20 years of building credibility, establishing professional reputation, and that fraud threatened to bring it all crashing down with his counter-blackmail. Counter-blackmail. Wimsey's eyebrow arched with interest, though his tone remained conversational. How fascinatingly complex your relationship with Sir Ambrose had become. The confession emerged with the inexorable flow of water through a breached dam. Blackwood revealed his early complicity in the salvage operations that had transformed Ambrose Rayner into Sir Ambrose Vale, serving as the photographer who documented, recovered artifacts, and helped establish their false provenance. His subsequent career as an investigative journalist had been built upon the foundation of carefully concealed criminal participation. When I began investigating his collection for my exposé, he produced letters I had written, photographs I had taken, evidence that would have shown me as an accessory to his maritime frauds. The irony was exquisite, the criminal threatening to expose the journalist who had helped create his respectable identity. Blackwood's description of the murder's execution revealed the full extent of his mechanical ingenuity. He had indeed returned via the coastal footpath after establishing his railway alibi, entering through the prepared window to find Sir Ambrose waiting in the gallery for what both men knew would be their final confrontation. He offered to destroy the evidence of my complicity if I would abandon the investigation and write favorable articles about his collection instead. When I refused, he became violent, attempted to strike me with a bronze paperweight. In the struggle, he fell against the mantelpiece. The head wound was considerable. The staging was improvised, Blackwood continued, his voice acquiring the mechanical quality of a man reciting from memory. I realized his death would be attributed to the falling dragon's head, if I could make the mechanical evidence support that conclusion. The rope system he had prepared for his own theatrical suicide made it possible to create the illusion of supernatural intervention. Wimsey nodded with something approaching professional admiration. Your adaptation of Sir Ambrose's own suicide mechanism demonstrates remarkable presence of mind under extraordinary pressure. The timing calculations alone required considerable precision, coordinating the weapon's release with the discovery signal while maintaining your railway. Alibi? He indicated the ship's bell at the gallery's eastern end. Mrs. Bright heard this bell ring at 20 minutes to 8 by the kitchen clock, 5 minutes short of 8 by Sir Ambrose's preferred chronometer. The sound summoned household attention at precisely the moment when your presence in London would be unquestionably established by multiple witnesses. As the November evening deepened outside the gallery windows, Blackwood's psychological resistance crumbled completely. He sank into Sir Ambrose's chair with the defeated posture of a man whose elaborate deceptions had been systematically dismantled by superior investigative methodology. 20 years of careful construction, he murmured, his voice carrying the hollow ring of absolute defeat. A reputation built piece by piece, story by story, until I had become someone whose opinion mattered, all destroyed by a bronze dragon's head and a handful of hemp rope. Parker stepped forward with the quiet authority of a man whose duty had been clarified by complete confession. Mr. Blackwood, I am arresting you on suspicion of the murder of Sir Ambrose Vale. The formal arrest proceeded with bureaucratic precision, though Blackwood offered no resistance to the proceedings that would transform him from celebrated journalist to convicted murderer. As the handcuffs clicked into place with metallic finality, he looked toward the bronze dragon's head with something approaching ironic appreciation. There's a certain poetic justice, he observed, with a return of his professional detachment, in being destroyed by the same mechanical precision that I used to destroy Sir Ambrose, though I doubt the irony will provide much comfort during the years ahead. Wimsey watched the proceedings with the detached interest of a scholar observing the conclusion of a particularly complex theorem. The long gallery settled into silence as the formal procedures concluded, and somewhere in the house's depths, a clock struck the hour with mechanical precision, the first honest chime the building had produced in months. Truth, Wimsey murmured to Parker as they prepared to depart, like precision clockwork, depends entirely upon the proper alignment of all its component parts. Mr. Blackwood constructed an elaborate temporal symphony, but failed to account for the fact that mechanical witnesses, unlike human ones, cannot be intimidated into changing their testimony. The November night pressed against the windows with gathering intensity, but inside the gallery, the lamplight continued to illuminate the scene, where human ingenuity corrupted by criminal ambition had finally met its inevitable reckoning. The bronze dragon's head rested in silent satisfaction, having delivered its complete mechanical confession of systematic betrayal. As they descended the ancient staircase, Wimsey paused to listen to the house's various timepieces, marking their individual interpretations of the hour. Time, Charles, has been restored to its proper function, he observed with quiet satisfaction. Though I suspect Headland's court will require considerable chronological rehabilitation before its clocks achieve unanimous agreement. About the nature of temporal accuracy, the investigation had concluded with the mathematical precision of a well-wound chronometer, leaving only the quiet satisfaction of truth, finally revealed through the patient application of logical deduction and theatrical necessity. Justice, like mechanical inevitability, had achieved its appointed destiny through the proper coordination of evidence, opportunity, and human psychology, the eternal triangle upon which all successful detection ultimately depends. The morning light that filtered through Headland's court's tall windows carried that particular clarity which follows the resolution of complex mysteries, as though the very atmosphere had been cleansed by the application of rigorous logic to seemingly impossible circumstances. Wimsey stood in the library, a glass of Sir Ambrose's surprisingly excellent Madeira in hand, while Parker consulted his notebook with the satisfaction of a man whose case files would finally achieve completeness. One might observe, "Charles," Wimsey remarked, examining the ruby liquid with scientific interest, "that the most elaborate deceptions often collapse through the smallest mechanical details. Mr. Blackwood's temporal symphony required such precise coordination that a single discordant note, the muscle memory of operating a rope system, proved sufficient to bring down the entire edifice. The morning had brought systematic resolution to the case's various threads. Blackwood's signed confession, delivered in the small hours with that peculiar mixture of professional pride and personal defeat common to intelligent criminals, would ensure charges of murder in the first degree. Fenning and Hartwell had been cleared entirely, their London alibis confirmed by multiple witnesses and railway records. The bronze dragon's head awaited transport to the British Museum, where it would serve as an instructional example of sophisticated theatrical forgery. Mordaunt entered with his characteristic dignity, bearing news of the estate's systematic restoration to honest function. "The timepieces have been synchronized with Greenwich Observatory, my lord," he reported with evident relief. "For the first time in months, the household operates according to uniform temporal standards." "Excellent, Mordaunt," Wimsey replied. "Chronological accuracy, like moral rectitude, functions best when consistently maintained. I trust the staff have adapted to the novel concept of punctuality?" "With remarkable enthusiasm, my lord. Mary Kettle has accepted a position with a family in Belgravia, her testimony having established her as a witness of unusual reliability. Mrs. Bright remains to oversee the transition to new ownership, expressing confidence that the next master will prefer his morning tea at reasonable hours and his bells to ring only when deliberately summoned." Wimsey nodded approvingly. "The restoration of domestic order often proves more challenging than the initial detection of criminal disorder, though I suspect honest chronology will provide considerable psychological comfort once the household discovers the reliability of temporal truth." As Mordaunt departed, Wimsey moved to the window, gazing across the mist-shrouded landscape toward the distant railway line, where Blackwood had attempted to construct his elaborate alibi. The coastal footpath remained visible, its route marked by the distinctive clay that had betrayed the murderer's nocturnal journey. "The tragedy, Charles," he observed, "lies in recognizing that both men had achieved authentic expertise through sheer persistence. Sir Ambrose had genuinely become the scholar he pretended to be, while Blackwood possessed undeniable talent for investigative journalism. Their mutual destruction represented not merely personal failure, but the waste of legitimate intellectual achievement, corrupted by shared criminal history." Parker closed his notebook with decisive finality. Blackwood's error lay in believing that mechanical evidence could be manipulated with the same facility as human testimony. He discovered that Newton's laws remain remarkably resistant to journalistic interpretation. "Indeed," Wimsey agreed, producing his cigarette case with ceremonial precision. "The rope that he used to manipulate the dragon's head will likely provide the model for the rope that hangs him. There's a certain mechanical poetry in such symmetry, though I doubt he'll appreciate the literary qualities of his situation." As they prepared to depart Headland's Court, Wimsey paused to examine the ship's bell, now restored to its proper function as a timekeeper rather than an instrument of deception. He struck it once gently, listening to its clear note with the satisfaction of a musician hearing a properly tuned instrument. "Veritas temporis filia," he murmured, consulting his pocket watch with quiet satisfaction. "Truth is the daughter of time, though in this instance, time proved to be the daughter of deliberate deception until mechanical evidence restored proper chronological order." The Daimler awaited in the courtyard, its engine idling with mechanical honesty that seemed almost refreshing after days of confronting elaborate human deceptions. As they settled into their seats, Wimsey cast a final glance toward the long gallery windows, where the empty mounting brackets bore silent testimony to the moment when criminal ingenuity had finally met its inevitable reckoning. "The most sophisticated criminal schemes, Charles," he observed as they pulled away from the ancient house, "ultimately prove no match for the fundamental honesty of physical evidence. Ropes bear testimony to the tensions applied to them, Silver bears witness to the friction it has endured, and bronze remembers every impact with geological precision. The countryside rolled past their windows as they departed Lidford St. Agnes, leaving behind a village whose temporary notoriety would soon fade into the comfortable obscurity of rural English life. Behind them, the Dragon's Head Inn returned to its appointed function of providing accommodation for commercial travellers, its heraldically incorrect wyvern swinging in the morning breeze with cheerful disregard for taxonomic accuracy. Truth, Wimsey concluded, settling deeper into his coat as the familiar rhythm of travel restored his equilibrium. Like precision clockwork, requires only proper maintenance and occasional adjustment to function with mathematical reliability. Mr. Blackwood's error lay in attempting to edit time itself, a presumption that even the most accomplished journalist discovers has rigid editorial policies. The November morning continued its pale progression toward afternoon, and somewhere in the distance, church bells marked the hour with the honest precision of mechanisms, maintained by generations who understood that time, unlike human nature, could be relied upon to behave according to predictable principles. The case of the Dragon's Head had concluded with the mechanical inevitability of a well-wound chronometer, leaving only the quiet satisfaction of truth revealed through the patient application of logical deduction and the immutable testimony of rope, silver and bronze. As the Daimler disappeared around a bend in the country road, the corrected timepieces of Headlands Court continued their newly synchronized measurement of time's honest passage, while the bronze Dragon's Head, no longer passing for what it was not, prepared to earn its bread respectably, as a warning to the credulous, which is, Wimsey reflected, as much as any of us can hope for in a world where truth runs on rails and we persist in setting our watches by the moon.